Good evening. Sorry that we're late. Had some technical difficulties. The title of this evening's um, Dharma talk is "Freedom from Extremes," and that title it's used in different places, but that comes from the King of Samadhi Sutra or Samadhi Raja Sutra, I think third century text. And I'm going to read this. It says, this is supposedly attributed to the Buddha, and existence and non-existence are both extremes. Pure and impure are the same. Therefore, abandoning all extremes, the wise do not even abide in the middle. So one more time. Existence and non-existence are both extremes. Pure and impure are the same. Therefore, abandoning all extremes, the wise do not even abide in the middle. So again, simple description of the Buddha's Dharma is the middle way. Not too tight, not too loose. And that shows up all over the place in terms of whatever shows up, we push on those, and we're a constant kind of being compromised by extremes that we try to reject. That's an extreme. That we try to accept. That's an extreme. That's why I say don't accept it, don't reject it, don't do anything with it. You could just look at it. If you look at it, then you'll probably see both sides of it. And then, as it says in the sutra, picking and choosing are the disease of the mind. I'm not saying that you couldn't decide on this as opposed to that, but if it comes out of any kind of warfare or intense grasping or passion, aggression, and ignorance, it's motivated by hope and fear, then you're probably going to go to one side or the other. It seems necessary to watch this extreme behavior for a while before we interrupt it with some kind of a protocol for how we can stop grasping, stop rejecting, stop looking away. Seems to be necessary to do it with our awareness, so we actually see the nature of our mind, the way we keep objecting to this and agreeing with that and running back and forth different ways. So again, not too tight, not too loose, but rather just look at the polarities show up in our own minds, in our own experience of our mind sitting down facing the wall. Notice the way we lean this way, lean that way. We want this, we don't want that. We're looking for what? Something else. You're actually looking at the middle way, but we're not satisfied with that. We want something else to happen. We have boredom, perhaps, or some kind of tediousness about our lives. And rather than look at that tediousness, that just not wanting to be here, deal with this, not saying we want to abandon it altogether. We want some entertainment. We want something to taste a little better, smell a little better, feel a little better, think a little better. We want something else. This is coming out of beginningless time, and it is dependently arisen. The whole idea of dependent origination, if it's seen for what it is, even that is not true. When I say not true, pardon me, it doesn't fundamentally exist because it is dependently arisen. Anytime you have something that is dependent on everything else, you have an elaboration that, if seen as it is, if seen, shall we say, correctly, you're actually seeing, understanding, perceiving emptiness, because it doesn't have an independent existence. Nothing has an independent existence. Even the Buddha's Dharma, these are all concepts, ideas. These are all empty of what they seem to be. questions are good if you have them. I realize I just got started, but good to interact. I've been teaching or having interviews all day long, so give me some help here.
Could you read that again, please?
I can. So this is, as I said, 3rd century. This is studied in some areas. This also, another thing about this sutra, this is the sutra in which the first Karmapa, Jusam Kempa, who lived in most of the 11th century, there was a Tathagata who was going to roar like a lion, and it is said that was a prediction of his coming, even though it was several centuries later in the 11th century that he showed up. So Samadhi Raja Sutra, words of the Buddha: existence and non-existence are both extremes. Existence, non-existence, life and death, up and down, back and forth. You can take any extreme is going to, this will apply to. Pure and impure are the same. Therefore, abandoning all extremes, the wise do not even abide in the middle, even though it's called the middle way. But there's no abiding. This has a feeling tenor or modality or resonance or fragrance. You use any of those that has no reference point. So it can show up as not being this, not being that, not being sure, not being unsure, polarities of all kinds. Good and evil is the big one. Life and death, of course, is the biggest one, you could say. And to think, to believe, to accept one and reject the other, or go for one and get away from the other one. And it is saying in this sutra, and I don't know what the original Sanskrit that it was in, saying abandoning all extremes. I don't know, maybe abandoning, there might be other words for that. Maybe perhaps Chisho could help us with that. He could maybe find out what word is being used there, because it might not be exactly abandoning. It might show up differently as not particularly grasping or rejecting either direction, rather than abandoning both of them. My way of talking about it is don't do anything. Don't abandon it. Don't accept it. Don't reject it. Don't look away. Don't do anything with it. To actually abandon it might seem a little bit more active than what I would recommend, but can't really argue with the Buddha, I guess.
Junshu has a question. She says, you said if we observe rather than accept or reject, we will see both sides. Does everything have two sides?
If it's something that has an alternate or has a polarity to it, more than likely. Like Junshu, pure appearance, your name, there's pure appearance, like it's mentioned here. Pure and impure are the same. And so applying to your situation, anything you see arising that looks negative, anything you see that arises that looks positive, those are not as separate from each other as you might think. It's just fundamentally pure. Threefold purity. It's pure when it shows up. It's pure as it hangs out, and it's pure as it vanishes.
Shoto has a question.
Shoto.
He asks, what is the relationship between non-abiding and taking refuge?
So taking refuge, as you've heard, that life is suffering. The cause is wanting things to be different. And the goal is cessation, and the path is a Eightfold Path, or Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. And you listen to that, and you want to understand how to go deeper into that, how to have an understanding that that the Buddha is describing, as the Noble Eightfold Path, or the Four Noble Truths, rather. So you actually, just like going to sit down and face the wall, train your mind to see clearly. Exercise that part of the mind. And receiving refuge vow is an actual situation that you work with a preceptor, someone who's been working with this for a while, and is part of the lineage of teachers and students down through the centuries. And you actually have a ritualized way of doing that. So it's like kind of like signing on the dotted line, only not exactly. You're just saying, I'm going to do this, and I want some help doing this. So, and then there's a change of name, change of mark. So we do some things that are very relative to help us develop our understanding, our wisdom mind, to see that so that we can see and understand the teaching of freedom from extremes, so that we're actually liberated from the extremes of appearance and death, existence, non-existence. And what was the other part of the question?
What is the relationship between non-abiding and taking refuge? Taking refuge is a path leading to non-abiding. You can't just non-abide, because that's ego. Ego loves that kind of dessert. It loves some kind of thing that can, so you can go and tell your friends that, read the teachings of the Buddha. It's talking about non-abiding. Hey man, I've been doing that. I'm just not abiding anywhere. I'm just non-abiding. And your friends will say, wow, that's all right. How's that non-abiding coming? Pretty good. You got to work at it though, man. We start to teach people about abiding. I'm not accusing you of anything. Jiuzan has a question.
Certainly.
He asks, how is it that freedom from extremes can show up as embodying an extreme?
That's how it shows up. Otherwise, you can't. There can't be freedom from extremes unless you see them. So you see that, you might embody it. You might be very negative, terrible thoughts might show up because they're dependently arisen. So you may have to spend some time with that. But if you understand this teaching and what it is pointing out at, then there is a complete willingness to do that. And one of the ways that we do that is we cut into the primary extreme of me and you guys. The sword of Manjushri, as I talked about earlier today. We actually begin to see that and work on that no separation by actually attending to, being aware of, and seeing the way we continually separate out and accuse or blame or credit or reward, and just to watch that polarity without adding to it, like the idea of don't do that. Now, some teachers do this differently. They actually work a long time in the provisional area to try to get you to act like a Buddha, or act more pure, or do away with the impurities. It's not saying it's wrong. It's just I think it needs to be done with the awareness rather than with following rules, obeying other people or other. Now, if you happen to have a teacher who teaches that way, and you have a strong connection with this teacher, then I would say that's probably your path.
Junshu has another question. She asks, is the middle way an extreme?
It's just a way of talking about it. We have to say something. So whoever wrote the Samadhi Raja Sutra and wrote down the words of the Buddha, apparently, have to say something about it. So life is suffering. You could say that teaching is an extreme. Not just suffering. People will immediately say, well, not all the time. Well, he said, yes, it was. So that's an interesting area that we're shut down on. So yes, there are going to be extremes, but this is a way of introducing you to this situation where you see that those extremes, they get their meaning from each other. They are dependently arisen. So freedom from grasping at this and rejecting that, freedom from the tendency. We're not saying that fire is hot and water is cool. We're not saying there aren't differences. Of course there are. But it's about observing those and don't join, don't quit, don't do nothing with it, but just see it, so that witnessing quality begins to see the fundamental nature of pratitya samutpada, or dependent origination, which is empty of a self and empty of an other. Why? Because it doesn't have any independent existence. It's dependent on everything else for its apparent existence or singularity. More?
She has a follow-up question.
Certainly.
If we see a preference we have, would it be helpful to play with that by trying to desire or grasp at its opposite, to try to see how they are not separate?
So I wouldn't necessarily promote that, but I also, if that shows up in you've been meditating for a few years, you practice a lot. So if some kind of a protocol, or call it an experiment or something like that, I would say yes. But I wouldn't say that to someone who is totally using their intellect or their mind to try to go into this material. It's somebody who has to have a strong awareness practice, shikantaza, or its equivalent, however you want to look at it. Somebody who's really training their mind to see clearly. Because otherwise, the tendency to grasp onto this and reject that is very subtle. When we do that, instead of just doing it and watching it, we do it and look for what? Results. Oh, it doesn't matter. Well, ego will settle for any result, because if it sees something that's right or sees something that's wrong, it will take credit for seeing it. And then what is happening there? And then there's the viewing of the situation, and then there's this. So that's the objectivity, and then there's the subjectivity. Ego gets another little paper thin onion skin level of credential, but ego doesn't need much. It can survive on water only.
Kozan has a question.
Kozan.
There is a teaching attributed to Maitreya through a sangha called separation of the middle from extremes. Is this pointing at the same as freedom from extremes?
I think it is a different way of saying it. Yes.
Shisho has a question.
Yes.
Is the witnessing the independent of pratitya samutpada?
For a while, when there's first a witnessing of that, there's a since we're embodied, since we have all these apparently separate situations going on, then for a while, until one actually sees what it is, you see it's not separate. So that's why it's like looking at yourself. Only it's not like looking at another person that looks like you. It's the very seeing of it, the very smelling of the incense, the very seeing darkness outside the window, the very sound of the neighbor's car starting, the sound of a bird flying by. Not separate. Has to be seen. And if it's seen, it's ordinary. I mean, it's unusual. It's unusual, but it's ordinary. Nothing special. It's just the truth. And that's why it's sometimes called the, I think it was I can't think of who said it, torch of certainty. It's a clarity. It's a clarity about it that is so clear that you're certain of it. You're certain of what you see.
Brad from Indiana has a question.
Yes, Brad.
What is a strong sitting practice?
24 hours a day. So it would be different. It's a good question. I don't mean to make light of it. It depends on who it is and how long they've been sitting. There's so many causes and conditions that arise around that. A person who has a mate, or possibly has children, or lots of other, or a really busy job situation, a householder, we call them a householder yogi or yogini. Then might be, half an hour a day might be quite a bit. So I would say if you have the time, probably a minimum of an hour a day, and a block sit once a week would be good. If you don't live in a monastery, if you live in a monastery, you're just by the form, you're going to be practicing a lot more than that. But if you're on your own somewhere, which I think you are, I know you have, you're married and so on. So in your situation, I would just say, quite often I just generally say, well, schedule it for, I sit every day from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. and do that. And then maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks, or, you could set up a 4-hour block sit. So you sit down, strike the bell and sit there for 4 hours. Or you strike it when you start, 4 hours later, you strike the bell again. And what you do in that time is mainly to try to meditate. But I always say, I'm saying now, fight with it. Discipline is not about obeying anybody. It is about acknowledging and respecting forms. And that means the form that is showing up in a sore knee. I had to learn all that the hard way in 1980 when I tried to make myself sit there, because the person in front of me, I think she was probably made of stone, because she would sit there literally for 4 or 5 hours without moving at all, flat on a zabuton, no cushion, not move, right in front of me. So I tried to do that, and so it's situational. It's different for each person, each person's form. Some people can sit very, very still for long periods. Means nothing. When I say means nothing, of course it means something, but it doesn't mean that they're more awake, more enlightened, more disciplined than you are, who's being a wiggle worm. It's always about awareness. It's not about maintaining anything, including samadhi. If it's samadhi, you don't have to maintain. You have to maintain it, then it's a relative situation, which is not going to last. It's going down. You don't have to maintain the torch of certainty.
Eric Wilson has a question.
Eric.
He asks, is ordinary / seeing clearly the same as freedom to extremes? Bowing.
Well, I'm not following exactly what you're saying, but you might find yourself in situations that could conventionally be thought of extreme, and you might even be aware of that extreme in your situation. But very difficult if you're living without struggle, and you're living without following any kind of greed or any kind of anger. You've understood that in a deep level. Then what you do may show up as extreme to some people, but probably not to you. Sometimes in the Tibetan tradition, because they acknowledge when someone does have a deep understanding of who they are, have an awakening, sometimes their activity can be quite bizarre. So it's sometimes called a crazy wisdom, because it's not the apparent sanity or the pretentious sanity of ego. It is the fundamental sanity of reality showing itself through a living being. And that can be outlandish. The Buddha was pretty outlandish when he left his kingdom of riches 2,500 years ago. Told his dad, as we know, or as we suspect, told his dad, I can't do this. I have to go, and went out into the forest with his homies, and began to train his mind. Went without food, sat on rocks, probably all kinds of other bizarre things, trying to understand what suffering was, understand what sickness, aging, and death was, because this is what he saw. Why is there sickening? Why is there aging? Why is there death? So it was an extreme from what he did, but from our point of view, it was crazy wisdom, because he saw the craziness of his world, and he wanted to know the truth of that. But to the people who are laminated to it and fighting with it, and they were just maintaining their physical life, thinking it was a straight line when it was circular, right up until the time that they expired or died and went back into the elements. So, point of reference is a reference point about that kind of craziness. I'm not sure if I've responded to your question as you asked it, but that's what showed up. Don't do anything unless you have to. That way, you won't give anybody all of your money, and you won't take all of somebody else's money. It's called the middle way. You're broke.
Kozan has another question.
Certainly.
She says, freedom from extremes seems to describe a basic situation. What is the way to be free from extremes?
To look at the bars in your personal prison, to look at them and see them for what they are. And don't get rid of them. Don't cover them up. If you see pride, don't cover it up with shame. If you see shame, don't cover it up with pride. That's a very simple one. Polarity. That freedom from it. There's no pride. There's no shame. And somebody else might say there's humility, but you certainly wouldn't claim that. You wouldn't even claim lack of humility. You wouldn't claim anything. Just watch the mind. Sit down, hold still, and watch the way you keep objecting to yourself in some way and to others. If you're judging other people's activity, if you think they're wrong, this is an extreme. Freedom from that is to see that happen, but don't attach to it. Don't detach from it, and don't ignore it. Passion, aggression, and ignorance. Very simple and very difficult formula to understand. We'll grasp onto it. We'll throw it away. Well, that's true. Oh no, that's not true. Or I'm not sure. I don't know. I think I have something else to do. Ignorance. Look right at it.
Chisho has another question.
Chisho.
He asks, how do we practice not abiding in the middle during sitting practice?
Don't worry about it. Just keep sitting. So if you find yourself, if you would decide that you're abiding, you're probably not. And if it shows up and like, hey, wait a minute here. For a while I was extreme, and then I was the other extreme, and now I'm kind of abiding in the middle. Oh, that's an extreme. So you've heard me say it this way, Chisho and everybody else, is if you're doing this, as it's being pointed out, you won't know it. There will be no credential for it. You just won't have any questions in particular.
We have time for more questions. Questions?
Certainly.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
And I think you've already alluded to it when you first started your talk, but it seems like the world we're living in now is highly polarized.
Yes.
From one extreme to the other. And it's difficult to find the truth, it seems, in what's being brought forward in our political arena, in any of the arenas. So how do we approach those extremes without being caught up in them?
So don't be too concerned about being caught up. Be concerned about training your mind. Spend some time sitting down, doing nothing but just watching what your mind does. Don't accept it. Don't reject. Don't look away, as you've heard me say. And then when the extremes show up out in, on whatever, MSNBC or local radio station, or in your neighbors, or in your whomever it may be, insofar as you can, just observe that and receive it, and notice how you add on to comments on what you're receiving. And it's not about getting rid of anything. It's not about joining. Just whatever's showing up, don't object, don't agree, and don't look away. And in that way, it begins to clarify the very mind, your mind, that is how you're looking. That's how you're looking, how you're receiving, what you're doing with it. It's very, very difficult to not have a reaction towards things. I've never said that you shouldn't react. I've never said never lose your temper. Although in our precepts, the misunderstanding is don't get angry. Well, there's no way you can help get it. Be very aware of that anger and what's happening there. Just like it says, don't kill. You can't help but kill something. If you're going to live, you're going to kill something. And if you justify that by saying it doesn't have eyes, it doesn't have a mother, you're just lying to yourself. Because anything that's living is what is being referred to. You should be more aware that you're going to need to kill. So you should be very careful how you go about doing it and very respectful to living things. And the same thing with politics. Be very respectful of what's going on because both sides are confused. Anytime there's polarity, if you see picking and choosing, you've got confusion. That doesn't mean you shouldn't vote, of course. We have to participate in the culture we live in. So do the best you can with the way things show up. Things have been pretty bad for a while. Yes, go ahead.
Shoto has another question.
Shoto.
He asks, does having no more questions mean we'll have answers?
What was your Dharma name again? Was it Hozan? Shodo? Yeah. Go back and look at your private name. Hozan. And I would say yes and no. I have. Saying there's no questions is a way of teaching. It's not that you won't have questions. As Suzuki Roshi pointed out, and a long time ago, I think in a talk, and they made it the title of one of his collection of talks, not always so. You can't find something that's always the case. Even though a volcano will argue with you. I've been here millions of years.
Junshu has another question.
Junshu.
If I watch myself constantly go from one extreme to the other, where is the freedom in that movement?
Takes a while. It's called practice. So you come into this world just like a little Rumi who lives at the monastery, the tiniest monk there. You know, he's watch how he learns. He learns. He looks at something. He pushes on something. It moves over. He tries to sit on a truck that's too tiny and he falls over. You know, he's looking at that. But then now if his parents can just not meddle with him, protect him, but don't meddle him and don't pretend to teach him stuff, then it'll be an interesting situation to watch as he grows up. What is he, year and a half right now? In the same way, look at what's happening. Look at the negativity. You've got as big a load of negativity as anybody does. Maybe more. I know you. But the amazing thing is you're aware of that, and you can actually watch the way the negativity rises, and how tempting it is just to blame somebody for it. And you may have to do it, and you may have to blame your parents or Shoto or blame someone else for how you feel, and they may be the trigger for that. But the fundamental situation is you're responsible for your emotions. Nobody pours emotions into you. So you're responsible. And that means not to blame, but you have the ability and need to respond to that just as directly as possible. Just receive. Whatever shows up, be a good host, hostess, hoster.
Kozan has another question.
Go ahead, Kozan.
Is it necessary to be aware of apparent extremes to be free of them?
Yes, you have to go through an understanding of relative truth. So yes. And it starts, the practice of that is a little bit. Basically, it's with your mind. You have to go within. Just use the obvious one. What looks like within. Until there isn't any within. There's just this. If you need it within, it shows up. If you need it without, it shows up. Everything is, you're in charge of everything. You're responsible for everything that happens is your fault. You specifically. And what am I saying? I'm saying drive all blames into one. Drive teaches 7 points of mind training. It's one of the relative truth relative bodhicitta, I think. Just anything that happens, it's your fault. Take it instead of looking for who did that. Well, he said this, but I did this. Look what she's doing. Don't do it. And everyone's going to have to work with a slogan like that in different ways. Some people won't even do it. Some people need to work with, of the two, me and those guys, keep the principal witness. Yours would be drive all blames into one, if I may say so.
Brad from Indiana has another question.
Yes, Brad.
Actually, it's a two-part. What is polarity? What does that actually refer to?
It's just a way of talking about the oppositions everywhere, the night and day, polarized. This and that, up and down, back and forth, male and female, all kinds of polarities. There's polarities within polarities. There's just, it seems that the polarizing part is what continues to make the wheel of samsara continue to appear like it's something that's tumbling along through time and space. Time and space is a polarity, and it's unreal. I mean, it has a reality, and if you think this is proof, I tap this, and that's an illusion. It's not that there wasn't something happening, a sound, but the very happening and the very perception of it, the entire situation itself is illusory. It doesn't last. Nothing has its own independence as a separate good thing. There's always bad things. Anytime you have a Buddha, you have sentient beings. Anytime you have sentient beings, you have Buddha. And neither one of them fundamentally exist without that relationship. This is called the first teachings that the Buddha talked about, which had actually been around to some extent before he got there in the Indian tradition. Everything that has an apparent singularity or identity, anything from you or your job or your wife or your teaching person or your other students, friends, neighbors, dogs, cats, trees, buildings, rocks, dependent. They get their meaning from the polarized quality of things. You can go more deeply into that by sitting down and watching the polarity in your own mind. That's the way to do it. You can see it out here pretty clearly, but in your own mind, in our consciousness, in our awareness, it's the substrate of the belief system that I'm here, you're over there. There's such a thing as life and death and right and wrong is the very thing that's being addressed right here in existence, non-existence, the polarity there, pure and impure, all those polarities. Where do they start? Right here. You actually sit down and you can actually watch them. You can start out by you think you're looking at a wall. It's very simple. Look again.
Eric has another question.
Eric.
He said, yes, thank you. You sometimes distinguish between freedom from and freedom to. Seems like seeing clearly would be synonymous with freedom to extremes. And he says, the peepers sound amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. You don't even have the window open. You can hear those peepers. They're keeping the fish and the frogs company. Well, they are frogs, though, aren't they? So I think if you see that, then there's not going to be do anything about it. And why? Because you're actually looking at yourself. You're actually the quality of what. So therefore, awareness doesn't belong to anyone. But the imputation, if we see something because we have eyes, because we have a position in the room we're in, or in the field, or up the tree, or that we strengthen that identity with someone, us, me. There's some kind of ongoing continuity that is there, but it's still constantly changing. One more wrinkle every day. Nothing lasts. If it's upsetting you, then there's the attachment. But if you see it and just watch it come and go without anything extra, then middle way. Don't need to get anything. Don't need to get rid of anything. You don't want something else to come. You don't want something else to leave. And the things that are like the peepers, just ignore them. They want to peep too.
Rumi's mother has a question.
Rumi's mother, I know her. Yes.
When Rumi points at something and says, and I name it, am I meddling?
Every time. I've been watching you guys, and when he points at a toy truck, you say truck. That's not helpful. Let him find that out. Let him name it.
What do you mean by teaching, and when is teaching meddling?
When you're teaching, when you think you're a teacher and you're teaching, that's meddling. When the student comes to you and gives you permission, asks you, no matter what it is, teach me. I want to learn this. Will you teach me this? Then you can say, you might say, well, here's what this involves. What I always say if somebody asks me to function as their teacher, I might say a lot of things, but one of the things I say, give me the benefit of the doubt. That means if something gets goofed up, or you see me functioning in a way that you don't approve of, or you think is wrong, come and talk to me about it. Give me the benefit of the doubt. At least come and say, it looks to me like you're doing this or doing that, or confusing people. You're not really helping people, or you're not really helping me. I've had people do that, but they didn't do it in a conversational voice. They yelled at me. So follow with that. The whole teacher-student situation should be mutual and not somebody just because they have a stick. The teaching person gets his or her or their credential from the dynamic with the student. Sometimes that credential is not exactly true. Sometimes some people show up as teachers and they're charlatans because they want something from you. They don't want to help you. They want payment. And there's nothing wrong with payment. We should pay. We should help. But in our situation, we call it dana. So that nothing is required.
Chisho has another question. During the practice of just receiving, there doesn't seem to be a quality of extremes, just some events coming and going. What exactly is the middle in that practice?
Your question is the middle. That's the middle way. Just what is this? Rather than this is this and that's that, and this should go away and this, I should have more of this. For that to show up in one's everyday life, this means the boundary between meditation and post-meditation has vanished. And you are completely not separate from anything. If there's ego mind left, there's still shreds of the self-centeredness left around. That can still get nervous because it doesn't like not knowing. It doesn't like not knowing this opposed to that, or this is right, that's wrong. It's freaked out by it. So that's why sitting facing the wall trains you, brings you through, just reconditions you into a consciousness, a human being with consciousness who is just going to watch what's happening rather than interfere with it. If you just watch what's happening in your thoughts and your knee starts to hurt, I say get up and rub your knee. Whereas some traditions say sit there and sit through the pain. To me, this is just silly. Even though I did it, I was told to do that many years ago, and so I tried to do it, and it didn't work out so well. So I would say observe and pay attention to your body. Force nothing. Don't even force meditation. Set up a form and then watch how much difficulty you have aligning yourself with the form rather than being some kind of a macho thing and making yourself sit there. As soon as you look for right and wrong, you're back into extremes. There is no right and wrong. That's a misunderstanding. I'm not saying that somebody that said they were going to come into the monastery and keep a certain hold a certain form. But it's not wrong if they don't do it. You might want to look and see what's up with that. Give everybody the benefit of the doubt so that they can say, I forgot. That's pretty viable reason. Or say, I woke up with a migraine, or all of the various things. Since we have such good communication with our technology these days, it's pretty difficult to misunderstand somebody.
We have one final question here from Shoto.
Shoto, go ahead.
He asks, is the Dharma Mountain, Hozan, in my name a hurdle or something I trip over?
No, it's that you already have the truth. You're a mountain, you're a huge guy, and you have a really tiny mind. Not of the dinosaur variety. I'm saying it's there and it's definite, but it's the mountain that's important in your situation. Just hold your seat. There isn't anything else but that for you. Shining path. Yes, I had to go look them up. I didn't remember.
Shall we close and dedicate the merit?
Yes, thank you. So
I will.
do you want to conduct it? Okay. Onyo is going to conduct the dedication of the merit, since we're all spread all over the place. You want to use that? Yeah.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho san chi shipu shi son bu sa moko sa moko ja ho mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.
Arrivederci.